You know that feeling when someone you trust completely destroys you? When your best friend steals your boyfriend and your boyfriend calls you worthless? Well, what if I told you that sometimes the person they're betraying isn't who they think they are at all? If you love stories about karma, justice, and people getting exactly what they deserve, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Trust me, the ending will blow your mind. Today I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the power of hiding in plain sight. This is about Sarah, a young woman from Boston who spent 3 years pretending to be paralyzed to discover the truth about the people closest to her. And when she finally revealed who she really was, let's just say some people learn the hard way that looks can be deceiving. Sarah Mitchell had been sitting in that wheelchair for 3 long years. To everyone around her, she was the tragic girl who'd sacrificed everything for love. The story they all knew went like this. Sarah had been walking with her boyfriend Jake through downtown Boston when a drunk driver lost control. She pushed Jake out of the way and took the full impact herself, shattering her spine and losing the use of her legs forever. What a beautiful love story, right? The devoted girlfriend who gave up her future to save the man she loved. Everyone in their small Massachusetts town knew the story. Sarah, the daughter of a single father who worked as a janitor at the local high school, had thrown away her scholarship to Harvard to take care of Jake after the accident left her unable to walk. But here's the thing about Sarah that nobody knew. She wasn't just some poor janitor's daughter. She was Sarah Mitchell, heir to the Mitchell Industries empire, one of America's wealthiest families. Her father wasn't really a janitor. He was Robert Mitchell, a billionaire who built his fortune from nothing and was now worth more than most. Small countries dot the wheelchair, the helplessness, the tragic backstory. It was all an act. An elaborate test that her father had suggested after the real accident. Because yes, there had been a real accident. Sarah really had been hit by that car, and she really had spent months in the hospital fighting for her life. The medical bills at Boston General had reached into the millions. But Sarah had recovered completely. The doctors called it a miracle. Her father, Robert, had seen too much betrayal in his lifetime to trust easily. When Sarah told him about Jake, about how much she loved him and wanted to marry him, Robert had made a suggestion that changed everything. "Sweetheart," he'd said during one of his visits to her hospital room, "I've learned something painful in my 60 years on this earth. People will love you for your money, for your status, for what you can do for them. But will they love you when you have nothing? Will they stay when you can't give them anything?" Sarah had protested. Jake was different. Jake loved her for who she was. "Then prove it," her father had said. "Don't tell him you've recovered. Don't tell anyone. Stay in that wheelchair for her. While keep living like you're the poor janitor's daughter who lost everything. See what happens when people think you have nothing to offer." At first, Sarah thought her father was being paranoid. Jake visited her every day in the hospital. He held her hand, whispered sweet promises about their future together. He swore he didn't care about her condition, that he'd love her no matter what. But then the visitors started coming less frequently. The phone calls got shorter. Jake began mentioning how hard it was, how much he was sacrificing. He started talking about other girls, just as friends, he'd say. Beautiful, successful. Women who had everything Sarah used to have. Still, Sarah held on to hope. Maybe her father was wrong. Maybe Jake was just struggling with the situation, which was understandable. Then came the day she met Melissa. Melissa Garcia had been Sarah's best friend since middle school. They'd shared everything, secrets, dreams, clothes, late-night conversations about boys and futures. When Sarah first introduced Melissa to Jake, Melissa had gushed about how perfect they were together. After the accident, Melissa became Sarah's primary caregiver. She'd come over every day, help Sarah with basic tasks she pretended she couldn't do, run errands, and provide emotional support. Melissa seemed like the perfect friend, loyal, caring, always there when Sarah needed her. What Sarah didn't know was that her father, Robert, had been quietly investigating both Jake and Melissa. He'd hired private investigators to follow them, to see what they did when they thought no one was watching. The truth was uglier than Sarah could have imagined. The wedding was supposed to be Sarah's moment of triumph. After 3 years of testing, 3 years of pretending, she finally decided that Jake had proven his love. He'd stayed with her, proposed to her, planned a future with her despite her supposed disability. Maybe her father had been wrong. The morning of the wedding, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at herself in the mirror. In a few hours, she'd wheel herself down the aisle, marry Jake, and then, surprise, she'd stand up and reveal the truth. She'd planned it all out. She'd rise from her wheelchair during the ceremony, shocking everyone, and then explain that she'd been testing true love. It would be romantic, magical, the perfect ending to their story. Her father knocked on the door. "Come in, Dad," she called, and Robert Mitchell entered, but not as the janitor everyone thought he was. Today, he was dressed in an expensive suit, looking every inch the billionaire he actually was. "Baby girl," he said, his voice heavy with sadness, "I need to show you something before the ceremony." He handed her his phone, and Sarah's world collapsed. Video showed Jake and Melissa together in Jake's apartment. But they weren't just talking. They were wrapped around each other, kissing passionately, and the conversation that followed made Sarah's blood run cold. "God, I can't wait for this charade to be over," Jake was saying. 3 years of pretending to love that cripple. Do you know how hard it's been? Melissa laughed, a sound Sarah had heard thousands of times, but never like this. Cruel, mocking. "Well, think about the life insurance policy you took out on her. Once she's gone, we'll have enough money to start over somewhere else." "The plan is perfect," Jake continued. "Marry her. Take her on a honeymoon to those cliffs in Maine she's always wanted to visit. And then ... oops. Tragic accident. Poor disabled girl couldn't handle the rocky terrain. Sarah felt like she was going to be sick. The man she loved, the man she'd literally taken a car to save, was planning to murder her for insurance money. And her best friend, the woman who held her hand through the darkest moments of her supposed disability, was helping him. But it got worse. "You know what the best part is?" Melissa was saying in the video. "Everyone will feel so sorry for Jake, the devoted boyfriend who lost his disabled girlfriend. He'll be a hero, not a suspect. And I'll be right there to comfort him through his grief." "I almost feel bad for her," Jake said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "She actually thinks I love her. She has no idea that I've been with you this whole time. God, the things I've had to do, pretending to care about her, pushing her wheelchair around, acting like I don't mind being seen with damaged goods." The video ended, and Sarah sat in stunned silence. Her father put his arms around her. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered. "I hoped I was wrong." But Sarah wasn't crying. Instead, she felt something cold and determined settling into her chest. They wanted to play games? Fine. She'd been learning from the master her father had. Built his empire by always being 10 steps ahead of his enemies. "Dad," she said, her voice steady and calm, "I think it's time we showed them exactly who they've been messing with." And this is where the story gets really good, because Sarah wasn't just going to expose them. She was going to destroy them in the most beautiful, poetic way possible. The Salem Community Center had never looked more beautiful. White flowers everywhere, soft music playing, 200 guests seated in perfect rows. Sarah sat in her wheelchair at the back of the venue, watching everyone she'd ever known filing in to witness what they thought would be the wedding of the year. Jake stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, looking nervous but excited. Melissa, her maid of honor, was adjusting flowers and whispering to the other bridesmaids. To everyone watching, it looked like a fairy tale wedding. The devoted boyfriend finally marrying his disabled girlfriend with her loyal best friend making. Sure, everything was perfect, but Sarah's father had been busy in the 3 hours since. She'd seen that video. Robert Mitchell might have been playing a janitor for 3 years, but he hadn't forgotten how to wield power. With a few phone calls, he'd assembled a team that Jake and Melissa never saw coming. First, there were the private investigators who'd been documenting Jake and Melissa's affair for months. They had photos, videos, financial records showing the life insurance policy Jake had secretly taken out on Sarah. They had evidence of the inheritance scam Melissa had been running, using her connection to Sarah to get donations from wealthy families who thought they were helping a disabled girl. Second, there were the lawyers. Robert's legal team had been quietly building cases against both Jake and Melissa for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Third, there was the media. Robert had connections with every major news outlet in New England. This story, the disabled heiress who exposed her would-be killers at her own wedding, was about to become national news. But the most important person Robert had called was Detective Maria Santos from the Boston Police Department. She was sitting in the audience right now, waiting for Sarah's signal. As the music began and Sarah started her slow journey down the aisle, she felt calmer than she had in years. Let them think they were about to get away with murder. Let them believe their plan was working. The ceremony began beautifully. The pastor spoke about love, commitment, and loyalty. Jake said his vows with what seemed like genuine emotion, promising to love Sarah in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. If only he knew how much worse it was about to get. When it came time for Sarah's vows, she took the microphone with a smile that made her father proud. "Jake," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent venue, "3 years ago, you made me a promise. You said you'd love me no matter what happened, no matter what challenges we face. You said you'd be there for me when I was at my lowest, when I had nothing to offer you." Jake nodded, looking touched by her words. "Well, I have something to tell you, and I hope you'll understand why I did what I did." The audience leaned forward, expecting some romantic revelation. Sarah continued, "You see, I've been lying to all of you for 3 years. The truth is, I'm not disabled. I can walk. I recovered from that accident completely, and I've been pretending to be paralyzed this entire time." Gasps echoed through the venue. Jake's face went white. "I know what you're thinking," Sarah said, looking directly at Jake. "Why would I lie about something like that? Why would I put myself through 3 years of pretending to be helpless?" She paused for dramatic effect. "Because I wanted to see who would love me when they thought I had nothing. I wanted to know who my real friends were. I wanted to test whether the man I was about to marry actually loved me, or if he was just staying with me out of pity." The audience was dead silent now. Jake looked like he might pass out. "And you know what I discovered?" Sarah's voice grew, stronger, more confident. "I discovered that some people will lie to your face while planning to destroy you behind your back." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet. "Jake, remember yesterday when you were at your apartment with Melissa? You thought you were alone, didn't you?" Jake's face went from pale to gray. Melissa, standing behind Sarah in her maid of honor dress, looked like she might faint. "Should I play the video for everyone?" Sarah asked sweetly. "I think our guests might be interested to hear what you really think about me." "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about," Jake stammered, but his voice cracked. "Oh, I think you do." Sarah pressed play, and Jake's voice filled the venue through the sound system. "God, I can't wait for this charade to be over." 3 years of pretending to love that cripple. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, cries of outrage, people standing up in shock. Sarah's supposed disability had been a source of inspiration for their entire community. She was the girl who'd sacrificed everything for love, and Jake was the hero who'd stayed with her. Now they were hearing the truth, but Sarah wasn't done. "Keep listening," she said, as Melissa's voice came through the speakers. "Well, think about the life insurance policy you took out on her. Once she's gone, We'll have enough money to start over somewhere else. The venue erupted. People were shouting, standing up, pointing at Jake and Melissa, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. There's more, she said. Jake, would you like to tell everyone about our honeymoon plans? About those beautiful cliffs in Maine you've been so excited to visit? Jake looked around desperately, like a trapped animal. Sarah, please, I can explain. The plan is perfect. His own voice interrupted him from the speakers. Marry her. Take her on a honeymoon to those cliffs in Maine she's always wanted to visit. And then, oops. Tragic accident. The venue went dead silent. Then someone screamed. Jake's own mother, sitting in the front row, stood up with tears streaming down her face. Jake, tell me this isn't real, she cried. Tell me you weren't planning the ... But Jake couldn't speak. He was staring at Sarah like he was seeing a ghost. Sarah stood up from her wheelchair. The effect was electric. People who had known her for 3 years, who had watched her struggle with daily tasks, who had helped fundraise for her medical expenses, watched in stunned amazement as she rose gracefully to her feet. Surprise, she said simply. The venue erupted again, but this time it was different. People were cheering, applauding, crying. Sarah's recovery was a miracle. But then they remembered the video, and the cheering turned to anger directed at Jake and Melissa. You son of a bitch, someone shouted from the back. You were going to kill her. And you. A woman pointed at Melissa. Her best friend. How could you? But Sarah raised her hand again, and somehow everyone quieted down. There was something in her posture, her presence, that commanded attention in a way she'd never had while sitting in that wheelchair. Jake. Melissa, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the venue. I want you to meet someone. She gestured toward the back of the venue, where a woman in a dark suit was standing up. This is Detective Maria Santos from the Boston Police Department. She's been investigating you both for the past 3 months. She has warrants for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about a dozen other felonies. The detective stepped forward with 2 officers who had been positioned strategically throughout the venue. Jake Morrison, Melissa Garcia, you're under arrest. What happened next was the most beautiful example of karma I've ever witnessed. But Sarah wasn't finished with her revenge. Not even close. As the police were handcuffing Jake and Melissa, Sarah's father stepped onto the altar. But gone was the janitor uniform, the humble posture, the quiet demeanor everyone in Salem knew. Robert Mitchell stood tall in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and when he spoke, his voice commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I think it's time you knew the truth about my daughter and our family. He paused, looking out at the 200 shocked faces staring back at him. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I'm the CEO of Mitchell Industries. You might have heard of us. We own about 40% of the tech companies in Massachusetts, including most of the ones your children work for. The silence was deafening. People were starting to recognize the name, starting to understand what this meant. Sarah isn't the poor janitor's daughter you've known for 3 years. She's the heir to a fortune worth approximately $8 billion. She's been accepted to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. She speaks 4 languages fluently and has been running charitable foundations since she was 16. He put his arm around Sarah, and for the first time in 3 years, she looked like who she really was, confident, powerful, radiant. The question you're probably asking yourselves is why, Robert continued. Why would my daughter pretend to be disabled? Why would I pretend to be a janitor? Why would we maintain this deception for 3 years? Sarah took the microphone from her father. Because we wanted to see who you really were, she said. Not just Jake and Melissa. All of you. We wanted to know who would be kind to someone they thought had nothing. Who would be a true friend to someone they couldn't get anything from? Who would love someone just for who they are, not what they can provide? She looked around the room, and her expression wasn't angry. It was sad. Do you know what we discovered? Most of you ignored me. Before the accident, when you thought I was rich, you invited me to every party, every event. You wanted to be my friend. But when you thought I was just a disabled girl whose father cleaned toilets, I became invisible. The audience was shifting uncomfortably now. People were remembering their own behavior, their own choices over the past 3 years. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah called out to a woman in the third row, "you used to beg me to come to your charity galas when you thought I had money. But when I asked if I could volunteer after the accident, you told me you didn't have any positions for people with special needs." Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah continued, addressing the high school principal, "you fought to keep me out of the advanced classes after the accident, even though my grades were perfect. You said it would be too challenging for someone in my condition." The principal couldn't meet her eyes. "And Jake's family," Sarah turned to face Jake's parents, who were still sitting in the front row looking devastated. "You made it very clear that you thought Jake was making a huge sacrifice by staying with me. You kept introducing him to other women just as friends, because you thought he deserved better than damaged goods." But then Sarah's expression softened, and she smiled. "But some of you were different. Mrs. Rodriguez, you brought me soup every week and never asked for anything in return. Tommy-chun, you modified your delivery route to bring groceries to my house even though it was out of your way. Dr. Williams, you never charged me for medical consultations because you thought I couldn't afford them." She paused, looking at the faces of the people who had been genuinely kind to her. "Those of you who were good to me when you thought I had nothing. Your kindness meant everything. And it's about to mean something concrete." Sarah's father stepped forward again. "Mitchell Industries is expanding our charitable foundation," he announced. "We're establishing the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Community Heroes. Every person who showed genuine kindness to my daughter during these 3 years will receive a grant. Mrs. Rodriguez, your restaurant just received $1 million investment. Tommy, your delivery business just got the contract to supply all Mitchell Industries facilities. Dr. Williams, your clinic just received a $10 million endowment." The venue erupted in shocked whispers and tears. People who had been kind without expecting anything were about to have their lives changed forever. But Sarah held up her hand one more time. "As for those of you who show your true colors over the past 3 years, well, you're about to learn what it means to burn bridges with the wrong family." And that's when the real revenge began. Over the next few weeks, Salem, Massachusetts, learn what happens when you cross a billionaire's daughter, who's had 3 years to plan her revenge. Jake and Melissa were just the beginning. Within 48 hours of the wedding, Jake was fired from his job at Peterson Construction. Turns out, Mitchell Industries had just acquired Peterson Construction, and Sarah's father had some very specific ideas about employee conduct. Jake's landlord, whose building was owned by a subsidiary of Mitchell Industries, gave him 30 days to vacate. The life insurance policy he'd taken out on Sarah was canceled and flagged as fraudulent, which meant he was now under investigation by the state insurance commission. But the real blow came when Jake's mother called him, crying. "The bank is foreclosing on our house," she sobbed into the phone. "They said the mortgage company was sold to a new owner, and they're calling in the loan immediately. Jake, we're going to lose everything." What she didn't know was that Mitchell Industries had purchased the mortgage company 3 years ago, right after Sarah's accident. Robert Mitchell had been playing a very long game. Melissa's destruction was even more thorough. It turned out that her successful event planning business had been funded entirely by secret grants from the Mitchell Foundation. When those grants were suddenly canceled and the money was called back, Melissa discovered she owed approximately $200,000 that she didn't have. Her office lease was terminated, her business license was revoked for fraud, and every vendor she'd ever worked with received detailed information about her attempted murder plot. Sarah's revenge extended beyond Jake and Melissa. Mrs. Henderson, who had snubbed Sarah after the accident, discovered that her exclusive country club was losing its lease. The building was owned by Mitchell Industries, and the new owners had decided to turn it into a community center for disabled veterans. Mrs. Henderson's charity, which had rejected Sarah's volunteer application, lost its major funding source. When the Mitchell Foundation withdrew its annual $1 million donation, Principal Peterson found himself in front of the school board, answering uncomfortable questions about discrimination and why he tried to limit Sarah's educational opportunities. The board was particularly interested in his policies regarding disabled students, especially since Mitchell Industries had just donated $50 million to the district for special needs programs. It was a masterclass in systematic justice. But the most beautiful part of the revenge was how it affected the community as a whole. Sarah and her father announced the establishment of the Mitchell Community Center, which would provide free services for disabled individuals, job training for unemployed workers, and educational opportunities for anyone who needed them. The center would be located in the former Peterson Construction Building, and it would be staffed by people who had shown genuine kindness during Sarah's 3-year test. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had brought Sarah soup every week, was hired as the center's director at a salary 3 times what most people in Salem made. Tommy Chun's delivery service became the exclusive supplier for the center, securing his family's financial future. Dr. Williams was given a satellite office in the center and a budget to provide free medical care to anyone who needed it. Within 6 months, the balance of power in Salem had completely shifted. The people who had been kind to Sarah when they thought she had nothing were now the most successful, most respected members of the community. Those who had shown their true colors were struggling to rebuild their lives and reputations. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Sarah ran into Jake at the grocery store. He was working as a bag boy, living in a studio apartment across town and facing trial for attempted murder. When he saw Sarah, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Sarah," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was confused. I made terrible choices, but I did love you. Part of me really did love you." Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Jake," she said quietly, "the saddest part of this whole thing isn't that you tried to kill me for money. It's that you never knew who I really was. You spent 3 years with me, and you never once tried to understand what I was thinking, what I was feeling, what I dreamed about. You saw a disabled girl and decided that was all I was. You never bothered to look deeper." She paused, watching his face. "If you had actually loved me, if you had seen me as a complete person instead of just a burden, you would have known that something didn't add up. You would have noticed that I was too well educated, too sophisticated, too comfortable, with wealth and power to be who I was pretending to be. But you never looked that closely, because you never really cared." Jake started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "The man I'm going to marry actually sees me. He fell in love with who I am, not what I can give him. He's going to be here any minute to pick me up, and when you meet him, you'll understand the difference between real love and whatever it was you thought we had." And that's when the final piece of Sarah's new life fell into place. The man who walked into the grocery store that day was not what Jake expected. His name was David Chun, Tommy's older brother, who had moved back to Salem 6 months ago to help with the family business. David was a pediatric surgeon who had been working at Boston Children's Hospital, but he'd taken a sabbatical to care for his sick father. David had met Sarah during her 2nd year of pretending to be disabled. He'd been volunteering at the community center, teaching first aid classes, when Sarah had wheeled herself in to ask about volunteering as well. Unlike everyone else, David hadn't treated her differently because of the wheelchair. He'd talked to her like she was any other person, asked her about her interests, her goals, her thoughts on everything from local politics to international news. What David didn't know was that Sarah was testing him, just like she tested everyone else. During their first conversation, Sarah had been struck by how David responded to her. He didn't speak louder because she was in a wheelchair. He didn't offer to help her with things she could obviously do herself. He didn't change the subject when she mentioned wanting to travel or pursue challenging goals. He simply treated her like an intelligent, capable person who happened to use a wheelchair. Over the months, they'd become friends. David would stop by Sarah's house to check on her father, who he thought was a hard-working janitor struggling to care for his disabled daughter. He'd bring books he thought Sarah would enjoy, engage her in debates about medical ethics and social justice, and include her in group activities with his friends. Sarah found herself looking forward to David's visits in a way that she never had. With Jake, she'd always felt like she was performing, being the grateful girlfriend, the inspiring disabled person, the woman who was lucky to have someone willing to sacrifice for her. With David, she felt like herself. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah was having a particularly difficult day, feeling frustrated with the deception and exhausted by the constant pretending. David found her crying in her garden. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside her wheelchair. "Talk to me. What's going on?" "I just feel so trapped," Sarah said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said to anyone in years. "Like I'm living someone else's life, and I don't know how to get back to being myself." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, I've been wondering about you." Sarah's heart stopped. Had he figured out the deception? "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "I mean, you're obviously brilliant. You have opinions about books most people have never heard of. You speak French fluently. I've heard you on the phone with that medical supply company. You understand complex medical procedures better than most of my nursing students. You're running circles around everyone intellectually, but you're pretending to be grateful for basic respect." Sarah stared at him. "I don't know what your story is," David continued, "and I'm not going to push you to tell me. But I want you to know that whoever you really are, whatever you're hiding, it doesn't change how I feel about you." "How do you feel about me?" Sarah whispered. David smiled. "I'm falling in love with you. Not with your situation, not with some idea of who I think you should be, but with your mind, your heart, your terrible jokes, and the way you light up when you talk about things you're passionate about." That was the moment Sarah knew she'd found something real. She still hadn't told David the truth about her identity, but she had started letting him see glimpses of who she really was. She'd stopped dumbing down her conversation, stopped pretending to be more limited than she was. With David, she felt like she could be brilliant, ambitious, and complex. The night before the wedding, Sarah had finally told David everything about her real identity, about the test, about what she discovered about Jake and Melissa. David had listened without judgment, holding her hand as she cried about the betrayal and the loneliness of the past 3 years. "I understand why you did it," he'd said, "and I'm glad you did, because otherwise we might never have met. You're not angry that I lied to you?" "You weren't lying about who you are," David said. "You were just hiding your circumstances. The person I fell in love with, your kindness, your intelligence, your strength, that's all real." Now, standing in the grocery store 6 months after the wedding disaster, Sarah watched Jake's face as David approached. David was tall, confident, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who saved children's lives for a living. When he reached Sarah, he kissed her forehead and took her hand naturally, without any of the performative gestures Jake had always used to show what a good boyfriend he was. "Ready to go, beautiful?" David asked. "Almost," Sarah said. "David, I'd like you to meet Jake. Jake, this is David, my fiancé." The contrast was stark. Jake in his grocery store uniform, looking exhausted and defeated. David, in scrubs from his shift at the hospital, radiating the confidence of a man who was exactly where he belonged. "Nice to meet you," David said politely, though Sarah had told him everything about Jake. Jake couldn't speak. He was staring at David like he was seeing the future he'd thrown away. "We should go," Sarah said. "We're having dinner with my brothers tonight. They're flying in from New York to meet David." As they walked away, Sarah heard Jake call her name one more time. "Sarah, wait," she turned back. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Jake, I hope you find happiness someday. I hope you learn to see people for who they really are, not just what you think they can do. For you. But forgiveness? That's something you'll have to earn from yourself. And that was the last time Sarah ever spoke to Jake Morrison. Her real life was just beginning. 1 year later, Sarah Mitchell married David, John, in a ceremony that was everything her first wedding attempt had pretended to be. The venue was the Mitchell family estate in the Berkshire Mountains, a sprawling property that had been in the family for generations. 300 guests attended, including Sarah's 3 brothers who had flown in from around the world. Her eldest brother, Marcus, a successful diplomat, walked her down the aisle. Her middle brother, Alex, a Grammy-winning musician, performed the wedding song he'd written especially for her. Her youngest brother, Ryan, a tech entrepreneur, had designed a custom app that let guests share photos and memories in real time. But the most important people at the wedding were the friends Sarah had made during her 3 years of testing. Mrs. Rodriguez, dressed in a beautiful gown that Sarah had helped her choose, sat in the front row crying happy tears. Tommy Chung was David's best man, having become like a brother to both of them. Dr. Williams officiated the ceremony, having been ordained online specifically for this purpose. Robert Mitchell gave a toast that brought the entire venue to tears. 3 years ago, I suggested to my daughter that she test the people around her, he said. I thought I was protecting her from gold diggers and fair-weather friends. What I didn't realize was that I was giving her the greatest gift I could offer, the chance to find people who would love her for exactly who she is. He looked at David, who was holding Sarah's hand and looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. David, you fell in love with my daughter when you thought she was a disabled girl whose father was a janitor. You saw past her circumstances to her heart, her mind, her soul. That's not just love. That's the kind of love that changes the world. The reception was held in the estate's gardens, with fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees and a dance floor set up under the stars. Sarah's first dance with David was to the song Alex had written, a beautiful ballad about finding love in unexpected places and seeing beyond surface appearances. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came when David took the microphone for his own speech. Sarah, he said, looking directly at her, you taught me that love isn't about what someone can give you or what they can do for you. It's about seeing who they really are and choosing to stand by them no matter what. You tested everyone around you for 3 years, but you were also testing yourself, testing whether you could be brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to start over, and wise enough to recognize real love when you found it. He paused, his voice getting emotional. I didn't fall in love with your money or your family name or your social status. I fell in love with the woman who cried about feeling trapped, who debated medical ethics with passion, who brought soup to elderly neighbors and never expected anything in return. I fell in love with your kindness, your intelligence, and your strength. Everything else is just bonus. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah only had eyes for David. Later that night, as they walked through the gardens alone, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Epilogue. The wedding that should have been continued. Do you ever regret it? David asked as they walked hand in hand through the moonlit gardens. The 3 years, the deception, everything. You went through? Sarah considered the question, looking up at the stars above the estate that would now be their weekend home. You know what's funny, she said. I used to think those 3 years were lost time. 3 years of my life pretending to be someone. I wasn't watching people I trusted show their true colors. But now I realize they were the most important 3 years of my life. How so? Because they taught me the difference between being loved for what you have and being loved for who you are. They showed me that real friendship isn't about what you can get from someone. It's about what you're willing to give when they can't give you anything back. She squeezed his hand. And most importantly, they led me to you. If I hadn't been testing people, if I hadn't been volunteering at that community center in my wheelchair, we never would have met. You never would have seen past the circumstances to fall in love with me." David stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I would have fallen in love with you no matter how we met. Rich, poor, disabled, healthy, none of that matters. What matters is your heart, and your heart is beautiful. If you're loving this story of karma and true love, make sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think about Sarah's revenge. Was it too harsh, or did Jake and Melissa get exactly what they deserved?" 6 months after the wedding, Sarah and David established the Mitchell Chin Foundation, dedicated to supporting disabled individuals and their families. The foundation's flagship program was a scholarship fund for students who had overcome significant challenges, and its first recipient was a young man named Marcus Williams, Dr. Williams' son, who had been born with cerebral palsy but dreamed of becoming an engineer. The foundation also launched an investigation unit that helped expose fraudulent charity organizations and romance scams targeting vulnerable people. Sarah had learned firsthand how predators operated, and she was determined to protect others from the kind of betrayal she'd experienced. Jake Morrison served 18 months in prison for conspiracy and fraud. When he was released, he found a world that had moved on without him. Most of his friends had cut ties, his family had relocated to another state in shame, and his employment prospects were limited by his criminal record. But in a twist that surprised everyone, Jake found work at a rehabilitation center for disabled veterans, doing maintenance and groundskeeping. The job was arranged through a program that helped ex-offenders find employment, and Jake discovered that working with people who had overcome real challenges gave him perspective on his own mistakes. 3 years after his release, Jake wrote a letter to Sarah. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify his actions. Instead, he thanked her for showing him who he really was and told her that her example had inspired him to become a better person. He had started volunteering with suicide prevention programs, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about how selfishness and greed could destroy lives. Sarah never responded to the letter, but she kept it. David found her reading it one evening and asked if she was okay. "I'm proud of him," she said, surprising herself. Not proud of what he did, but proud that he's trying to become someone better. That's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes and try to do better. Melissa's story was different. Unable to accept responsibility for her actions, she fled Massachusetts after her release from prison. She moved to California and tried to start over, but her past followed her. Social media had made her story viral, and she found it impossible to build new relationships when potential friends could Google her name and find articles about the woman who tried to help murder her. Disabled best friend, the last anyone heard. Melissa was working under an assumed name at a small-town diner in Nevada, living alone and struggling with the consequences of her choices. Mrs. Rodriguez, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity. Her restaurant, Rosa's Kitchen, was now one of the most successful establishments in Salem, and she'd opened 2 additional locations with the help of Mitchell Industries investment. She still brought soup to elderly neighbors, but now she had a team of employees who helped her expand her acts of kindness throughout the community. Tommy Chun's delivery business had grown into a regional operation, and he married his high school sweetheart in a ceremony that Sarah and David hosted at their estate. Tommy often told people that meeting Sarah had taught him that success wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. Dr. Williams used his clinics endowment to establish a free medical program that served 3 counties. He'd also started a program that trained medical students to work with disabled patients, emphasizing the importance of seeing the whole person rather than just their condition. 5 years later, the full circle on a crisp October morning, Sarah stood in the nursery of her Boston home, holding her 6-month-old daughter, Emily. The baby had David's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen. David appeared in the doorway, already dressed, in his scrubs for his shift at Children's Hospital. "How are my girls this morning?" he asked, kissing Sarah's forehead and stroking Emily's cheek. "Perfect," Sarah said. "We're meeting Dad for lunch later. He wants to discuss the Foundation's expansion into international programs." "Your father is incredible," David said. "Do you know he's personally funding schools in 12 countries now?" Sarah smiled. "He says that watching me learn the value of true character inspired him to think bigger about how wealth should be used. He's determined to make sure Emily grows up understanding that privilege comes with responsibility." As David left for work, Sarah carried Emily to the window that overlooked the garden. The same garden where she'd once sat in a wheelchair, pretending to be someone she wasn't, testing the people around her. "You know what, little one?" she whispered to her daughter. "Your mama learned something important during those 3 years. She learned that the best way to find out who people really are is to see how they treat you when they think you can't give them anything in return." Emily gurgled and reached for Sarah's face with tiny fingers. "But here's what I want you to remember," Sarah continued. "Real love doesn't need to be tested. When someone truly loves you, they see your worth even when you can't see it yourself. They stand by you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are in your heart." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Marcus, Sarah's eldest brother, calling from Geneva. "Hey, sis," his voice came through the speaker. "I just wanted to let you know that the UN is interested in partnering with the Mitchell-Chin Foundation for that global accessibility initiative we discussed." "That's amazing," Sarah said, bouncing Emily gently. "Did you tell them about the technology David's been developing?" "I did. They're particularly interested in the communication devices for nonverbal disabled individuals. David's innovations could help millions of people." After the call ended, Sarah realized how perfectly her life had come together. She'd married a man who not only loved her completely, but shared her passion for helping others. Together, they were using their resources and abilities to make the world more accessible and equitable for everyone. The 3 years she'd spent in that wheelchair, testing the people around her, had led to this moment, holding her daughter surrounded by genuine love and working to create positive change in the world. And that, my friends, is what I call the perfect revenge. Not just getting back at the people who wronged you, but building something so beautiful and meaningful that their betrayal becomes the catalyst for your greatest happiness. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emily into her crib, she thought about the letter she'd never written, the one to Jake, to Melissa, to everyone who had shown their true colors during those 3 years of testing. If she had written it, it would have said this: "Thank you for showing me who you really were. Thank you for betraying me when you thought I was powerless, because it taught me the difference between conditional and unconditional love. Thank you for abandoning me when you thought I had nothing to offer, because it showed me who my real friends were. Most importantly, thank you for forcing me to discover my own strength. I thought I needed your approval, your love, your acceptance. But I learned that the only approval I truly needed was my own. You saw a disabled woman and decided she was worthless. You saw a poor man's daughter and decided she was beneath you. But you never saw me, my intelligence, my resilience, my capacity for love and forgiveness. That blindness was your loss, not mine. I hope someday you learn to see people for who they really are. I hope you discover that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, their physical abilities, or their social status. I hope you find the kind of love that sees beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. And I hope you understand that the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so full of genuine love and purpose that their betrayal becomes irrelevant." Sarah never sent that letter, but writing it in her mind gave her the closure she needed. As she kissed Emily goodnight and turned off the nursery lights, Sarah reflected on how the worst betrayal of her life had led to the greatest blessings. She'd found true love, built meaningful friendships, discovered her life's purpose, and learned that sometimes the people who hurt us are actually giving us the greatest gift of all, the chance to find out who we really are and what we're truly capable of. Subscribe. If you believe that sometimes the best way forward is to let karma handle your enemies while you focus on building something beautiful. And remember, the people who love you when they think you have nothing to offer are the ones worth keeping forever.